Hello and welcome to Let's Program with Scientier, and today we are going to continue our timeline program. So at the end of last time, I said that I was going to take some time in between episodes to figure out stuff relating to file I/O things and making sure that all works. So there's a few things that I had to add, but I did get it opening the way that I wanted, so I can set up the file association in Windows and then double-click on the file type. It's really easy. If you just save a file, you can right-click on it and be like, open with this thing in the properties. If you right-click and go to the properties of the file, you can set it up there. There's other spaces where I think you can set it up. Excuse me. And I'll eventually want to change it from the debug version to the release version once I make that. Excuse me. So there's a few things that I added, and I took some notes so I can go over them. So first thing first, you'll notice there's a big difference here. I added this part with the initial file, and I check if we have arguments of length. Then we grab the first argument and set that to be the initial file, and we pass that into the form when we make the form. So let's go ahead and back over here. You'll notice that I added a thing for that here. And I also added if there is an initial file that's been passed to us, so it has more than no length, which means that it checked out. So if we go back over here, there's a couple of things that I do that I should go over after I drink a little bit of water. So the first one is I also, so I make sure there are arguments, and if there are, I check the first one and ask, is this a file that exists? So if it's not a file or it doesn't exist or whatever, it won't try to open it. It doesn't do any sort of other verification, but that should be checked on the load side. So then the initial file is set. So this file should exist at the point in time when we get into here. And if it does exist, that means that this initial file will have a length greater than 0, and if it doesn't, then it won't. So then we load the data. So there's some stuff that I've added kind of above load data that I'll get to in just a moment. But the first thing that you'll notice is I added a known version Boolean here. So if it's a known version, that means if we were able to open the file and it didn't break, some of this stuff might explode if the file format is wrong, and that's okay. That will happen if for some reason you try to pass this a file on the command line that's bad. But anyway, so it will, if it's a known version, then after we close the file, we go ahead and set the file name there and load the timeline controls. This is really important. If we don't load the controls, then needless to say, it doesn't show anything. So this is really important to add. And so what I did here, is with this, I'm just going to go up here and talk about this a little bit. So we give it what timeline to load into. It's the main timeline that we need to read this into. And we also give it, now remember, if this was successful, it will have set up a new main timeline. We also tell it what tab control to load things into. If you remember, that's where we kind of grab stuff for our timelines. So we have a couple of functions here that I added. So to load timeline controls takes our timeline, it goes through all of the events in that timeline, and adds the event to the appropriate tab, as we specify here. And if it's a split timeline, then we also load that specific timelines controls. Why is it okay? Oh, no, never mind. This is load timeline controls, and this is load timeline controls. Wait, now I'm really confused with myself. Oh, they have different parameters, this is function overloading. This takes a timeline and a timeline tab, or a tab page, and this takes a split timeline. So even though these have the exact same name, they don't have the same arguments. So that's something called function overloading, and I did it by complete accident here and confused myself. But yeah, this is a totally valid thing. You can do this. It just means that it knows which one to call based upon what stuff you're giving it. So that's function overloading, and I accidentally did it here. But if we have a split timeline, we need to go ahead and get the timeline controls out of the split timeline node. We need to make it a tab page, give it its own information. Then we need to add that tab page. And then we come in here, and this is just stuff that I've already done. But you'll notice I use the selected tab.client size. That's just because that one already has a specified client size. This one, because it hasn't been processed yet, doesn't have a client size. So it kind of screwed up in the loading right here. Right here is where it exploded. Exploded is a bit strong. It just didn't have that second control appropriately sized. It was kind of default size, so it was a small little box. And that was specifically when I loaded from command line, so when I double-clicked on the timeline file that I had saved out, specifically when that had a problem. So that's why I used selected tab, and that fixed it there. Otherwise, this is stuff that I've already done for loading a new timeline control in and setting up the tab page. And then I just load the timeline controls. I call this function again on this split timeline with its tab page, which was made right here. So this is something called a recursive function, which is why it says recurse right here. So I just kind of repeat through this until I've loaded all timelines and their tabs and all of their controls. So that's much of what I did right there with those new functions. Now let me go ahead and grab my notes about what other stuff I did. So there's a couple of important things. I went over most of what I did. There's just one more thing that I did down here. I forgot to have this line, which meant that initially the open file dialog window didn't do anything because when I clicked OK, it wasn't told to do anything. So that was a really important line. It's a very simple one that I had to add, but that's the only other thing that I really needed to do. It didn't take terribly long to do all that, just a little bit. Just wanted to go over and review that stuff, so that way you know what I did in that file IO break. So with that all taken care of, I can now properly save and load files, and I can also set up file associations. That way when I double click on a timeline file, I think I made them .tlfs. When I double click on one of those, it will automatically open up my program and pass it as a command line, so that way this opens it right away. So that's where things are right now, and I see that I've taken a decent chunk of time, but the next, I guess, big thing that I wanted to do is this timeline overview stuff. So I think I was working on it in here. I'm going to close a few of these tabs because I don't need them. I don't think I need, well, I might need to go into that one, but I can always go into it later. So I was doing some processing stuff here to process timelines, to try to grab a bunch of information. Some of that's probably going to be useful, but I need to kind of mentally restart. Because this is maybe not the most useful. So I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to start this. If single branch. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff here where it's like, I don't remember what I was thinking. So I could go watch the video, but I'm not going to. I'm going to take a little bit of a burnt earth approach and just take this and comment it out because I don't need it. I do need the displayed timeline. Oh, I remember what single branch was. Yeah. That was timeline overview, this or all. So just this current timeline or all timelines. Yeah, so that's really important. I definitely need single branch. I definitely want orientation, I think. Displayed timeline is important. Okay, so this was going to be the thing that I called to set that up. So I want to, I need to review some of my code to make sure I remember what was going on, which is something that happens. Do I have... Okay, I may not actually have these. No, not what I want. This and this. Okay. Timeline, overview, display, events. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and region this. Regions are a really useful way to kind of organize your code. I'm going to put a little space between those because it's a little cleaner when I'm looking at that, and that just allows me to do that. Okay. So what this is going to need to do then is make a timeline overview form. Toff equals new. Whatever I'm going to call stuff. I'm going to just... Okay. Right. Okay. So what I need to, or what I'm going to do here is set up. Okay. Actually, I'm going to make the static public timeline overview form display timeline overview, and then this needs timeline and bool single branch. So then I can take my control that I'll be having, and I'll be doing stuff with that. This is going to go ahead and make a timeline overview form. Toff equals new. Toff dot stuff, and then it's going to return Toff. And I'm just setting this up ahead of time. This needs to be internal because that's how this works. Not form 1. I'm just setting this up in form 1 so that way I'm overview form dot display timeline overview. So that way I have this step taken care of and I don't need to kind of worry about it. So this is going to be true, and I need to grab timeline. Actually, so this is going to be timeline timelines dot selected tab dot tag. And I need to cast that into a timeline because this one is going to be single branch. It's just going to grab whatever timeline is the current one. And then I'm going to set that up so that way this does... technically, this doesn't matter. I'm just going to ignore that return data and just do this display timeline overview, main timeline, and it's not single branch. So that will display all the timelines. So that should be all that I need to do there. It's just going to spawn forms. If you make it, you'll need to close them manually. That's fine. I need to go toff.show and toff.bring to front. This is really important, actually, bring to front. If you don't do that, it may pop up the window behind other windows. It might not, but just calling bring to front just makes sure that it's at the front. I've had some programs where I'll show the form, but it's not. I don't tell it to bring it to front, and so it's like, wait, did that thing actually come up? And it's like, oh yeah, it did. It's just behind other things, so I have to go find it in the taskbar, and it's kind of obnoxious. So I just set it up so that way it brings to front here, so that way I don't have to worry about it. So this is going to have to call some stuff later, but I'm done with the form 1 side of things, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. And I'll probably want to use set information right here. but I'm going to abandon that bit of code right now in case I need it for later. I will leave it there. If I end up not wanting to use any of this analysis stuff, I will get rid of it. A lot of it that was I didn't have any idea how I was going to approach this problem, so I just kind of got rid of it. So what I want here is I want a, I'm going to call it a timeline event node. And then this is going to be, let's see, it needs, okay, so I'm going to then, so that's one node I need. I need a timeline root. So this is going to need a timeline root root. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of my thoughts are. This root is going to be used to sort of offset the position of the timeline, so that way you can use panning. I'm basically planning on not having scroll bars on this because that's a bit difficult to implement. So instead, I'm going to have panning, and this is going to handle that panning. So this is going to have a public int y and x that are going to be properties. So right now I'm just going to return root.x and return root.y. So the plan that I have going into this is I'm going to need, why is this formatting so weirdly? Probably because of this class. So kind of what my plan is to have sort of a zoom level that these are going to scale by in terms of how many pixels there are per year, effectively. So, and I'm just going to do this really dirty in terms of I'm not going to have a bunch of privates and protecteds and stuff. I just kind of want to get this thing up and running. It's not the cleanest sort of coding style. Water break. And you generally want to avoid doing it in like professional code if possible, but when you're just trying to get something up and running and you're doing it for your own private program, you don't need to worry as much about trying to quote be safe unquote and like protect your data and all that sort of stuff. If you're working with other people, even you do want to do that to make sure you're not exposing stuff that they could potentially access and do bad things with without realizing that they shouldn't be touching that stuff. But if you're working by yourself and you know nobody else is likely to be touching this code, it's okay, but you have to make sure you don't get yourself in the process. So that's real important. But so single branch is going to significantly affect how I do this processing. But I'm going to need a couple pieces of information, so I'm just going to put them right here. Timeline root root equals a new timeline root. So I need a list of timeline event nodes. Event nodes. There's a new list of this. So what I'm doing is I'm going to be structuring this quite differently than what I was doing down here. Because what I was doing down here, sort of my initial thought process for how I was going to set that up is very different than what this one is. So I'm actually going to change this a little bit for my own self. I'm going to make this, and then public event base. Owning event, get return owning event. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I need to set up some information. If value is equal to does not equal null, and then I want to go owning event equals value. Value is just the name of the thing that's being passed in. So there's a couple of, actually, I don't even want to give you a set here. I just want to give you a get. Okay, and the reason for that is going to become abundantly clear in just a moment. Void set owning event base e, and I want to have a graphics G. So there's a very important piece of information that I'm going to need to save with this, and that is how big, as it were, the name of this node is. So I might as well, sorry, I'm kind of jumping all over the place. Okay. When get return owning event dot date. I'm just adding that because I think it would be convenient to have, and it was on my brain for that moment. So I'm going to call something called measure string. I'm going to actually add a font F here because I need to know what font I'm using. So this is going to be e.name and F. Okay, and what does this function return? This function returns a size F, so I'm going to just come over here. I'm going to make a public size F size equals nothing. Go size equals there. Okay, and so what this will do is this will record for me how big this thing is, which is really important. I also need to go owning event equals E, because that's real important too. Okay, so I think that addresses all of those things. Now, this is going to be a little bit more complicated than this for a couple of reasons. The root position is definitely going to be important because that's going to allow me to be able to move the whole thing around. So when I'm processing this, every single one of these is going to get that same root assigned to its root. And that's just a way of consistently having everything track off of one point, so that way I can pan or adjust that root X position and it will move the whole thing around. In terms of like X and Y, this is probably going to be real basic off of the initial implementation. I'm going to refine it over time. So like I said, I've thought a lot about how I'm going to set this up. So what I'm going to do right now is, well, displayed timeline can equal timeline. And then I want to process events. So for each... okay, so actually what I'm going to do here is instead of making doing a thing there, I'm going to make another function called process timeline. And process timeline, okay, I need to actually, okay, I need timeline T, I guess. I'm thinking a little bit about how I want to approach this, because one of the things that I'm going to need to do is strip out information for, like, if it's single branch versus and whatnot, it's a little bit different. So I need a bool root timeline and bool recurse. So what I'm going to do here is for each node event base ev in t dot events, And then I need a timeline event node, tn. Hey, it spells 10. 10 dot set owning event to eb. I need to go ahead and pass this a graphics g, g comma font. So there's a default font to the control, and I'm just going to be using that font because that's both the font that I'm going to render with, and the and it's the font that I'm going to render with, and so it's convenient to grab here. You want to measure using the font you're going to render with, because that's going to tell you how big your thing's going to end up being. Okay. So is there any other information that I need to set with this? I need to set the root to be root, and let's see, the size will get loaded there. So yeah, this is all that I need right here, and I want all of the event stuff to be handled from here. So then I want to go if recurse and eb is split timeline. And then this is where I add in sort of the recursive functionality. So if we aren't recursing, that is if we're single branch. So this is the way process timeline is going to look. And I need to add actually to the event nodes 10. That needs a dot add. So we're going to come in here. We're going to give it our timeline. We're going to give. We're going to tell it that this is the root timeline. That will be relevant for some positional information that I'm going to need to add to this, which is going to have a basically a thing in here. Actually, let's change that from a Boolean to a timeline event node root timeline, and make this null because it doesn't need that information. It doesn't have an event node for this one. Recurse is if it's not single branch, then we recurse, and I need to get a graphics g equals graphics dot from how do I want to grab this? None of these are nice. I need to go this dot great graphics. There we go. I don't need the this. That was just a way of trying to find it. G. And then I can go g.dispose because we don't need it anymore, and we should clean ourselves up. Okay. This is how we're going to process events. And then we need to invalidate, which is going to tell it to redraw the control. So if we are recursing, and then there's a couple of things that we need to do. So the first one is to get a split timeline out of our event. And then we need to, I guess, just call process timeline. Only this time we go with st.timeline. And then this is 10. Recurse is true because we are recursing. If we were told to recurse, then we will always be recursing. So I don't need to worry about like what that value is. And then that's how we're going to handle getting all of the different timelines into our handy dandy timeline event node information. And so the next step after that. Oh boy, let my brain relax for a moment. Actually, it looks like we're at time. So this is kind of like the initial setup for what I'm going to do. And the general idea is that I'm going to be able to use the information within the timeline to be able to process how to compute the x and the y values. So I might need to add some additional information for them to be able to track. To be able to get that, I'll probably add it to timeline root. If I need any more like scaling information, I'll probably put in timeline root. But I'll basically just like, here's how long a time thing is. And it's going to be really ugly when I first do it. But as I develop it, I will kind of tweak the spacing and stuff. So I don't know if next time will be the last time or not, but it should certainly be close. So we're getting towards the end of what I want to accomplish with this. I can definitely go through and like improve the date stuff, but I don't really intend to. So yeah. There is something that I want to do while I'm thinking about it before I kind of end, and that's to go ahead and add this. And make sure I move this up here. And the reason why I want to do that is I want to have the exact date information on the end of the name. So that way when you're looking at the display, it's like this time. And so just while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to override toString to just return the raw value. So I want to try to like make that so that way if I do ever decide to change up how that works, I don't have to update a ton of spots. I know there's a couple places that I probably will need to update, but I'm not going to worry about that too much right now. And I'm not sure if I'm going to or not. If I do, it'll probably be on my own time, unless there's a lot of clamoring for seeing that if I do decide to update it. So anyway, that will go ahead and take care of us for this episode. Next time, I will be continuing on putting together this whole timeline event node thing. So until then, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.